Hello, I'm back with another video, and this is now my fourth installment to the piece that I offered on violence, particularly within the United States. And again, I don't mean to just be putting random videos about violence, as serious and unfortunate as violence is. But I did feel the inspiration with that original video, and then I've had a few more reflections. Sometimes I've said in other videos that the act of enunciating our thoughts is a creative act, and also impetus in itself, to where further creativity can flow upon getting into the mode of speaking somewhat spontaneously and originally. And I don't mean that pretentiously. But I had another, this is a thought that has occurred to me I've had this thought at different times, and I think this may be one more component to the violence that we experience in the United States, but maybe even broader and historically. And that is that I wanted to point out the group dynamics of violence. We all know that there's nothing to play with about gangs. Just that very word itself, that might be one of the most potent words in the English lexicon, because it has a certain ring, and we all know what comes with that ring. And I wanted to point out that, if you can imagine times in prehistoric times, like without the modern conveniences, and you imagine how hungry you could be. Like, just imagine if the power went out, and there were no grocery stores for 2 weeks. What kind of chaos could ensue from that? Now, I think some of that might be the fact that we are thoroughly domesticated, and we are domesticated, dependent, and maybe even neutered in terms of economic competence in navigating the land. Generally speaking, for at least for me as a city slicker, to where we're more dependent on we've been reared to be consumers, and we're more dependent than we would naturally be in nature, which may be some of the chaos that we could imagine would ensue if there was a stop in commerce. But beyond that, with that, I would say that some of that is just the innate chaos of nature, and what hunger means in a natural setting. So all I meant to say is that we as human beings have always been hungry. And you can imagine that I've heard stories of like I've heard stories of the Great Depression, where there were stories of people cannibalizing their own family members, as heinous as that would sound. But I think that the forces of hunger are that powerful. And so you can imagine that effect has always been with us to different degrees. However, as a whole, humanity was able to come through these different periods in the current period amidst the hunger. And I think that some of that is that we may not truly understand what that kind of gang dynamic that is still with us really means, and what it has served in the past. I think that I think that one of the only things that could check the hunger and the propensity for violence of human beings, and allowed group dynamics, which group dynamics in itself is what has given us the strength to overcome nature, is that the some of the dynamics that play out when people, men, but also men and women, when people come together in groups, there are dynamics that play out that are profound, simply based on group dynamics. Like, there's the saying, three is a crowd, and how we all know that you can deal with a person one-on-one, and the experience is one thing, but when you introduce a third party, it can be volatile, and then so on and so forth. And there's a brilliant book, I can't recall what book it was, but it says that you have certain dynamics that change as you change the size and scope of a group fundamentally. So I think they said that we as human beings in our ancient past a typical community was only of a certain size, and that's actually the only size of people of group that we can actually effectively bond with and have meaningful interactions with as human beings to this day. I think like on like with things like social media, our access and reach can and influences can be very broad, and we can have broader interactions, but still the if you were to reduce your life to the fundamental and really impactful, meaningful interactions, it would likely be similar in scope to the groups of that would be in nature. So I think you would have like different groups in different numbers of groups, like in a tribal setting. Roughly speaking, you would have like what would be like a troop or a troop or a squad. It has certain dynamics, but then going broader, you have like a village, and that would have certain dynamics at that size. So what I wanted to say is that I think that when you bring when you introduce a group, there are certain evolutionary features to our psyches and our who we are as people as a group that make us become more vicious, competitive, but also loyal and sacrificing as part of being a group. And I think that some of that was to both protect us from other groups, but also to protect us from ourselves. And there's something called internecine, which is like infighting, and that infighting internecine is also a regulating component of, I would say, almost any relationship, one-on-one or in a broad setting. There's an infighting that is like a regulating, almost like in an immune system, and it keeps anything from getting too big and proud and out of control. It's like a counterbalance is that infighting. So that is also part of any group, and I think that that's a vital part of human life, is the way that infighting manages things, but also destroys things and shifts things and keeps life very flowing and dynamic. And while we're always changing and we're always moving and migrating, part of it is that infighting. But I just wanted to point out the some of the viciousness that is produced by people coming together, where a lot of I think that that's also part of some of the what appears to be senseless in some of the violence that we see. Now, I don't mean to call any form of violence senseless in itself, because if a person is living a lifestyle and has dynamics that are part of that lifestyle, there are balances and dynamics of that lifestyle that we can't understand from an outside perspective. So I don't mean to be arrogant in saying that group violence is necessarily senseless, but I just meant to say that if you were to look at violence that happens in groups, whether it's a group of people assaulting another group, or maybe like the violence that would happen in bars that's part of a group, all I meant to say is that some of the dynamics of groups is what can play out into very profound acts of violence that would seem senseless to an onlooker. And part of that is some of the dynamics that are created by a group in itself. And I think that plays into some of the violence that we see in the United States, where some of the reasoning and the rationale for the atrocities that we suffer, they don't conform to our strict linear logic, as that we can understand as individuals or as people that are not part of those groups. And I just meant to say that the group dynamic is a force in itself in any society or an environment that plays into violence. And I wanted to point that out in understanding our plight and our position and experience as African Americans in America, but also just as human beings wherever you may be viewing this from. So I offer this as food for thought, and just sharing my experience as a person living in the United States. I say anything you're into, keep up the work, and show mercy when you have it into your hand to do so, and you likely will have it in your hand to show mercy to someone or something at some point. Peace.